The Breach has been out for about 4 days as of me recording this video, and the current reviews are mixed. Well, at this point, we've had 2 sets of hotfixes already, which address a lot of the main issues people have with the game. So after having put in close to about 20 hours since the release of the Breach, plus my additional 130 hours since the previous early access, I wanted to take a moment to just talk about the current state of No Rest for the Wicked. This will be a little bit more of just me talking from my experience and just about the current gameplay and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna have some gameplay playing in the background as just some random B-roll as I talk. So the first thing that I want to talk about, and probably the most important for a lot of people, is the combat. Combat is the biggest area that people have a lot of complaints in, and rightfully so. The combat in Wicked is slower and more Souls-like. It's not an ARPG like a lot of people expected, and I think that's one of the core reasons people are maybe a little put off by the game. One of the main things with Souls-like combat is it typically follows a certain set of rules. Some of these common rules are, say, if it's an easy enemy, and they will usually have some lower HP, and they can be staggered quite easily on hits. This lets the player chain attacks together to quickly dispatch these types of enemies. And then to make an encounter more difficult, you can either add extra enemies like in a group to force the player into a gank situation, or maybe another rule is that if you want a difficult enemy, you usually place them solo, and then these enemies cannot really be staggered on hit. So it's more of a case where you're stuck in this game of patience, just waiting to see what the enemy's move is going to be, so you can either choose to dodge to punish, or maybe you can go for a backstab or a parry or something like that. Now, these rules, they were true in Wicked before the Breach update, and now when the Breach update came out, however, everyone pretty quickly realized that the enemies that were maybe once easily staggerable in the previous iteration of the game these enemies are now constantly trading blows with the player. It really felt like something was wrong with the stagger mechanic. This was very frustrating because even the most basic enemies now felt like you were in this eternal death dance with them, where one mistake could lead to your death. This felt especially true because players are very easily staggered themselves and can get punished pretty hard as a result. This was especially annoying when you were dealing with shield enemies. Hitting them would stagger you and they could just counterattack. I don't know, it felt exhausting. And then besides enemies being very difficult to stagger, they also felt like they had a lot more HP, which kind of meant that these fights were taking a lot longer than expected. I think another enemy that was very egregious, and I'm sure some of you will agree, archer enemies, they sprint at Mach 10 to get across the map before they start pelting you with a barrage of arrows. It's very annoying to deal with. All of that felt bad solo, but it breaks down even further when you add in multiple enemies in an encounter at once. It basically meant that you were stuck in this hit and run playstyle where you would have to poke at the enemy and you couldn't actually commit to any of your weapon combos. I think this issue is maybe exacerbated a little bit by the lacking focus generation. And if you've watched my Wicked content in the past, you would know that I'm more of the belief that focus generation should be limited, and focus attacks or rune attacks should be a big payoff attack that is kind of guaranteed that you win the fight if it lands. But I only believe that should be the case while the other combat pacing feels right, which currently it feels off. Or rather, I should say it felt off, because after the first hotfix that was put in, I believe on May 2nd, this fixed a lot of the stagger issues that enemies had, and I think a lot of people will find that combat now feels a lot more fluid again. One thing that I kind of noticed about the new enemies being staggered is it felt different. It feels more like we're interrupting attacks rather than staggering them. When enemies are making certain attacks and you attack them in their windup, you'll notice that they go into this little crumple animation where they're susceptible to attacks. And I'm not sure if this is actually considered staggering or maybe some sort of interruption instead. I haven't been able to test this because I don't have enchantments with stagger perks to, actually confirm that this is a stagger or an interruption or exactly what's happening. Anyhow, combat has been feeling a lot smoother since the update. The basic enemies also feel much more like a breeze, where you can kind of hack and slash your way through them in some cases. But the big enemies, they continue to still feel like you're getting that death dance where you're kind of actually trying to plan out how to dodge them, trying to plan out your focus and when you can use your rune attacks and stuff like that. So overall, I think that the actual gameplay feels a lot more like it did back when we were playing the initial version of the game, I suppose. And one final thing to note about combat is that I haven't used shields to block at all. I have one equipped, but I never use it to actually block. Just never really been a shield guy in this game. But I do know that initially in the Breach, players were taking massive amounts of chip damage with their shield. If this is still true, I didn't quite see it mentioned anywhere in the patch notes, but let me know if chip damage does still feel like either if that's been addressed or if chip damage is still a major issue. Let me know down in the comments. Maybe we can, raise that as one of the major concerns. Let's make shields actually block damage like they're intended, right? But moving on from the combat side of the game, the next topic is farming materials. This design decision seems very divisive. People hate the idea of having to go out and farm their herbs for healing, which is more of a design choice used back in games like Demon Souls or Bloodborne. People are also upset about having to harvest trees and ore for various things, whereas other people don't really mind these types of chores at all, as it scratches a bit of that collector's itch. Personally, I'm in the group that actually enjoys the farming aspect for these types of resources. I think it's a nice way to have the players go back into various parts of the world and revisit areas where different enemies might spawn and stuff like that. And to be honest, I don't even find myself grinding that hard. I mostly just pick up everything on the way through the various levels, and so far I've only really run out of healing supplies a few times, which has caused me to go on supply runs through some of the starting zones, sure. And if anything, there's just been one key item that seems to be missing very frequently, which are some of the herbs that go into some of your food items. And with one of the hot fixes, they actually increase the drop rate of those herbs. So now, even if you have to go back and farm for some of the herbs, it should only take you maybe, 15 minutes to make one quick run through an entire zone, and suddenly you're stocked up with a plethora of these herbs to satisfy all of your food cravings. But really now, as they buff these herb drop rates anyhow, as you're just exploring more and more zones, you should just be picking them up as you go. Now for the crafting components like wood and ore, those do take some dedicated time to go and grind. You will find yourself having to go for these supply runs a lot more frequently, especially as you're building up Sacrament for the first time. After you build up Sacrament, you only really need to farm ore and wood and leather to upgrade gear. But in my opinion, you will usually end up farming these materials as you're grinding levels or trying to find the correct pieces of loot for your build anyhow. So I guess the way I see crafting components is that you will need to get these eventually, but much like the food and ingredients for that, many of that just comes with playing the game, as long as you're taking a moment while exploring to just gather some resources. The only resources that are maybe a true pain to farm are resources that come from monster parts, and those are required to craft and upgrade certain gear beyond level thresholds. For example, bear claws. I have still yet to find a single bear claw. However, with Hotfix 2 that is coming out on May 3rd, they now increase the drop rates for some of these monster parts. So we'll have to see how this feels to play coming up in the next few days. Then there are some people who have issues with the time gates of this game. Now there are time gating with upgrading vendors in Sacrament, and there's also time gates with processing raw materials into crafting or upgrade materials. In both of these scenarios, it's easy to just queue them up and then just go about your business exploring or progressing the next zones. There's nothing that's that pressing that you need these processes to complete immediately, that there's just, I don't know, there's just no real issue that the time gating should be such a massive problem. And in all honesty, if you're being smart about taking trips back to Sacrament every so often, you can go and queue up more resources. You can repair your items and sell your items that you don't need. And you know, really the only thing that can be a little frustrating is waiting for some of the different buildings in Sacrament to go from rank 2 to rank 3, because I think at a base level these take about 4 hours. And yeah, I can agree that's a little annoying, but I can also just go and do something else while they process. I can go and explore another zone. I can go and gather some more ore for upgrade materials in the future. There's other things to do within the game. You don't have to have these buildings processed immediately. And really, I think the people that do have issues maybe with these types of time gates are the people who, they're just playing the game for the first time, so they're just excited to see what the new vendors have to offer when they're upgrading. And maybe this might be on me because I already know what to expect from the different vendors from having played the game initially. So I know what they're gonna sell, you know, at the different tiers. And I can kind of, you know, curb my expectations a little bit, and that kind of settles my anxiousness to get to the next tiers, I suppose. So just trying to say that I understand your excitement. You really want to see what the vendor is going to offer next. The third thing is game performance. I've personally had a pretty smooth experience so far. I do know that there have been issues in the past. For example, I don't own a Steam Deck, but I've heard some issues from others saying that the performance on Steam Deck is maybe a little lackluster. In addition, I've heard some mentionings of a memory leak with the game currently, which I haven't really noticed, to be honest, and I don't know if that's still an issue. So I haven't had any problems like that. I have, however, had instances where enemies are spawning in invisible, and that can always be a fun one when you suddenly get hit a lot of times from nothing and you're just dead suddenly. I also encountered a weird climbing bug where my character was stuck in a particular climbing animation, but this fixed itself when I just relogged. And I've had a few instances where I would experience a severe frame drop when I would enter new areas or encounter bosses for the very first time. Overall though, it has not been that bad for me personally. And I know that this is just my personal experience with the game. But again, as I'm recording this, a new patch is just releasing that mentions a few different performance fixes for these types of things, such as the invisible enemies and stuff like that. So because this fix is literally just dropping this evening, we will have to wait and see how this goes. But by all means, if we, the players, are having struggles and we're not able to run this game, be vocal about it, as we are currently. We are doing what we should. But as we see the devs quickly respond to these types of issues and they come up with fixes, I do hope that we update our reviews to maybe a more positive if the update did actually have a positive impact on our gaming experience. At least this way, we, the gamers or the players, can show the developers some good faith. And for the last section, I wanted to take a moment to just talk about the boss design in No Rest for the Wicked. What have you all thought about the bosses so far? I believe I only have a single boss remaining, which is in Marne Woods. I've heard some frustrations with that boss in particular, but again, with the new hotfix, some of the issues should be addressed, especially for some of the users who are using slower weapons. Personally, as someone who has gone through several of these bosses in the initial early access phase, I feel like they are a little easier than before. But again, I'm not sure if that's because I'm a little bit more experienced, so I know what to expect. I was able to one-shot every boss up until the new bosses, but I think that's to be expected for someone who has played the other early access. The new boss I did complete, I thought was really cool. I really like the concept of the fight. It reminded me a little bit of like the movie Annihilation, if anyone has seen that, and a particular scene in that movie. I really think that this boss fight had a very similar concept to that. I really like the audio and the visuals for it. Just really cool fight. I think each fight in the game has some pretty interesting concepts, and I'm curious as to what you all think so far. Have you been struggling with any of these fights? Which boss has been your favorite? Let me know down in the comments. Overall, the game is in a state of mixed reviews, but the developers are making rapid changes to fix the core issues players have, and I think that's respectable, especially if it's an early access game. I've personally been having a blast playing the game, and I can't wait to start a second character to try out some different builds while tackling the Serum Crucible again with this update. Maybe I'll give hardcore a try after I'm done experiencing the new zone, so I have a little bit of an idea of what to expect. But this was GooberTroy, and as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.